Caldwell would only be given 12. The bottom 4 would be the red area, and those would be given to Ray County as a buffer zone. And then they also incorporated Davis County, which was 16 townships. By this time, Mormons had already been living in both the Ray County addition, the Caldwell County land, 12 counties, as well as were already in Davis County even before these counties are made. This will prove difficult because there was some belief that we would restrict our movement. Of course, those restrictions could not be in writing. You cannot find them in any of the legislative history. You cannot find it in any of the resolutions or agreements because, of course, such agreements would be unconstitutional. As U.S. citizens, you could not be treated like the Indians were being treated with a reservation, that we had the right to live wherever we wanted to live. And while there might be places that would be easier, they couldn't legally preclude the Mormons from expanding to any place that we had the money to buy the land. And certainly, by 1838, especially by the summer of 1838, when we were leaving Kirtland, there is going to be a mass exodus into Missouri, and that is going to predominantly be focused at going to Davis County. And while we could spend time to understand exactly why that happened, we know that there is a center of the church in Davis County, which is known as Adam-on-Diamond, an early settlement settled by Lyman White that then was made to be the center place of the church in Davis County. Just as far west would be the center place of the church in Caldwell. These were major cities. We figured there was close to 5,000 people living in the far west area. There would be about 1,500 people living in Adam-on-Diamond. These would eclipse all the other cities in these two counties. And so as we know that would happen in short order, there would become a series of conflicts that would escalate, starting in August of 1838 when you have the first elections happening in Daviess County. And all of a sudden people realize that the Mormons are most likely going to block and vote in blocks. And there's a local resident named William Peniston who founded Millport, just about 10 miles south of the Gallatin, and he's running for office, and he's as a Whig, and he's running against a guy named Josiah Morley, a former judge, in which he was befriended Joseph Smith and is one of Joseph Smith's friends, non-Mormon friends in the area, and it becomes pretty clear to Peniston that the Mormons are going to throw their vote with Josiah Morley, and that they're not going to, and that Peniston has no chance of winning the election if that happens. That's why we have what we call the Gallatin Election Day battle, is that they were trying to preclude the Mormons from voting at Gallatin. Matter of fact, they were making the claim that the Mormons were already being precluded from voting in Ray County, and that they could just implement the same manner of precluding us there. They weren't precluding us in Ray County, for anything we can tell. But of course, this becomes a skirmish. No one is seriously hurt. It's a fist fight with a hickory stick or an oak stick. That's the biggest weapon brought out by the infamous Danites. But the reports are going to go back to Jefferson City that the Mormons are starting to not only be a powerful group, but they're starting to be a violent group. Now these are going to then be exacerbated tremendously through the rest of the summer as people start trying to preclude the voting to go on and the elections that have now occurred of people taking their rightful office. And it will result in the really only real battle that will happen of any significance, of military significance, happening in the end of October, when we'll have what we know as the Battle of Crooked River. The Battle of Crooked River, you have to understand that in these days you had state militias. These state militias were what kept the peace and were called out, and today they'd be such a rarity to have any of our National Guard be called out to hold the peace. But in these days it was the common practice, and they're well organized. Every county would have their own. There'd be a general commander. His name would be John Clark. He would be the general commander for Missouri, reporting to Governor Boggs. Then you're going to have the regional commander. He's going to be over the whole northwest portion of Missouri. He's going to be a guy named Atchison. Matter of fact, he's Doniphan's law partner, if you remember. He's going to be the regional commander. And then each county is going to have their own commander. And that's where you get some of these famous people that most of you have heard of and try to figure out exactly where they fit in the story. And you get someone like Samuel Bogart, a minister, a Methodist minister, but also the commander over the Ray County militia. And Bogart was a scoundrel in anyone's view, and he sent word that after these fights up in Gallatin that he needed to patrol the buffer zone between Ray County and Caldwell, and that he would guard that with his men. What he was really doing is, and we have numerous accounts, making raids and intimidating the Mormons up in Caldwell County, and in fact he would end up kidnapping 3 young boys. And word gets back to far west in Caldwell that these 3 young boys have been kidnapped, and the Caldwell militia, who just parenthetically would be Mormons, called out their militia. And their militia went to go rescue the boys from the Ray County militia. And they would then confront this all on the field on a little creek now known as Crooked River. And that battle would take place. Commander Patton, David Patton, member of the Quorum of the 12, he's known as Captain Fear Not because he supposedly had virtually no fear, and he proved it at this battle, losing his life. 2 will be killed at the Battle of Crooked River, Mormons, David Patton and Gideon Carter. 1 Missourian would also be killed, would be called a guy named Roland. There'd be several injuries. Matter of fact, some of the injuries were very serious. We also understand that 1 serious injury was done by a corn sickle. And while that's troubling for us, we know that's often what we hear when we talk about the next big battle or the massacre at Haun's Mill, in which then these same local militias, this coming from Livingston and Corral counties, are going to now invade into Caldwell County and attack Haun's Mill, killing 17 people. These battles and these armaments are going to go up to the governor, greatly exaggerated about our participation and our orchestration, and that will be the result of the Governor Boggs issuing on October 27th the infamous extermination order. This order is going to then allow, under color of law, the legal expulsion or termination of the Mormons in the full state of Missouri, not just in the areas of Davies, not just in the areas of Caldwell, but in all of the state of Missouri. So this concept that because we had expanded outside of Caldwell was the problem, they were not going to isolate the problem, they were going to actually exterminate us out of the state. Pretty much this would end up being a free-for-all for several days. The travesties that would happen to the saints, the retaliations that some of the saints would put upon the Missourians would be recorded and then reported back to Boggs that would further justify the order. He would also, interestingly, when they were having, you figure if someone's going to be told to leave the state, they would be told to leave. But that's not really what happened. They said you're to leave the state, but no one can move. And they actually sieged the cities, and they actually started moving everyone into far west. The key reason they claimed, and General Clark was the one orchestrating it, was he wanted to round up all the key leaders who were involved that might be charged with any crimes. And so during the course after about October 31st to November 9th and 10th, the entire city of Far West was under siege. No one could go in and out. They were bringing people in. In the end, they would arrest 53 of our leaders. They would first take them down to Liberty, thinking that's where they were supposed to be taken. Then they got instructions from Governor Boggs to take them to Richmond, to Ray County, thinking in part because that's where some of the crimes had happened, because the Battle of Crooked River took place in Ray County. So they were trying to find a place where they had jurisdiction to hold a hearing, because in Clay County, there was no alleged crimes having been committed, so there'd be no jurisdiction to hold a hearing. And that's where we have really kind of the belated but beginning of my story of trying to understand what happened when we get to the Austin King hearing. Austin King was a circuit judge, a state judge. He probably should never have sat on the case. The truth of it was because his brother-in-law was killed in 1832 in the course of the expulsion of the Mormons from Jackson County. And so he had an inherent conflict of interest. Most people would say that the court that he convened, or the preliminary hearing that he convened, was, well, Hiram called it a pretend court. Donovan, one of the lawyers, we had 3 lawyers working for us during this case, he would say that it wouldn't matter if a concourse of angels came down. Austin King had already made it decided before the case even began what he was going to do. Well, we know that what would happen is that there'd be all brought down into Richmond. This is where the famous story that Party Pratt writes of Joseph rebuking the guards would happen in Richmond. They weren't prepared. You figure 53 men, they had no jail large enough to hold them, so they started